I started off in this UFO field back in 1987. I became the youngest member in the world of MUFON. My grandfather had seen a flying saucer back in 1965 and got me really intrigued on what he saw. So that's what really started my whole interest in the field. I believed him. He wasn't somebody who make up a story like that. He's a very conservative Catholic Italian man who doesn't talk about flying saucers. Eventually became a member of MUFON. After many, many years, I became the national director of MUFON for Canada. So I was kind of in charge of all investigations of UFOs, UAPs across Canada. I kind of decided to take a step back and try to bring something a little bit different to the field. I felt that there was a little bit of empathy that needed to happen in terms of people who've had contact or have had close encounters with either craft or, believe it or not, beings of some type. And I founded We Are Not Alone, which is the WANA movement, W-A-N-A. So that's where all this came from. Been doing that now for about 6 years. And our first official project of WANA is the project Gravitaur, which is with Bob Lazar. The whole story started in 2021. I had an idea to create a professional model of a flying saucer. I wanted something that would be like a collector quality representation of what people have seen for decades. And I thought, you know, there's a lot of people who've seen them, but not a lot of people who've seen the interior of them. And the people who allegedly saw the interior of them, a lot of them were people who didn't actually dismantle the craft. So they might have had an experience, a really weird one, that they might have been taken up on a craft, but not anybody who's actually had hands-on, except for Bob Lazar. When he came out and explained that he was working on reverse engineering this technology, and he was actually given, you know, access to the interior of the craft and start dismantling the thing, that was huge. So I thought, why not make the Bob Lazar craft, like the sport model that he worked on? And so I took a chance, and I knew that it was going to be a really long shot because he said that he didn't want to have a lot of people reach out to him.
Is there anything else you'd like to say?
Really, don't come and try to visit me.
I just could imagine the amount of people trying to reach out to him. And I contacted United Nuclear, the company that he and his wife run. And I spoke to Zach, who was his guy at United Nuclear. And I said, you know, my name is Luigi. I have a company out in Montreal, been in merchandising for a long time, and I'm interested in doing this flying saucer. I could do this probably with information that's online, but it would be so much cooler if I did it with Bob Lazar and we would have his seal of approval on it. Zach said, I'll see, you know, I can't guarantee you anything. And I think it was a day or two later, I get a call and he says, you know, Bob will talk to you if you want to have a conversation. I thought, that's great. And so we ended up on a call, and on that first call, I remember Bob was interviewing me, you know, like, what have you done, and how would you do this, and why do you want to do this? Because obviously this was something we wanted to do on our side, and we just were going to use his information. So he wanted to make sure that we were not going to do something that was not representative of what he saw. And I guess he got appeased with my answers. He realized I knew what I was doing and how to make stuff. And he says, all right, he goes, you could come and see me. I'll tell you what this is all about. So that's how it all started. When I finally got to spend time with Bob, it was incredible because we spent very quiet time, just him and I sitting at a table with diagrams and you know, all sorts of stuff on the table. We had sample materials of different types of metals and colors and textures, and we had rulers and measurements, and we were building a craft together, which was the coolest experience because I'm building a flying saucer with Bob Lazar. It was clear at that moment that this was going to be a little bit more than just a die-cast model. I knew that, but I didn't know how. I didn't really know where it was going, but I just felt something at that moment. And went back, met my team. We built a whole book on the craft itself. And I think that whole project took a massive turn when we started using 3D technology to build a craft. And that's when we saw the potential of not just building the craft, but the environment that it was in. I wanted to make a box that looked like the hangar where this die-cast model would be, and create a box that looked like the hangar. And then we thought, well, why don't we just build a hangar for real and see what it will look like? And then Bob got involved in helping us build a hangar. And then he said, well, why don't we just go nuts? Why don't we just build the whole site, like all of S4? So I asked Bob, I said, would you be willing to help us and guide us if we decided to open the budgets and do that. And after a while, he said, sure. And that's how this whole thing went into creating S4, all the crafts that are in there, Papoose Lake, the whole landscape out there, all the way to Groom Lake. So this is really one hell of a project. The 80s are, in my opinion, well, it's my favorite decade. And incidentally, I asked Bob one time, I said, what's your favorite decade? And he said the 80s, by far. 80s were incredible. I mean, there's so many iconic things that happened back then, so many movies that came out regarding this. I mean, E.T., there was Star Wars, Predator, this is all alien stuff. Then you got movies like The Terminator, Back to the Future, obviously a big deal with what we're doing as well. And that inspired me when I was younger. And because the story of Bob Lazar happened in the 1980s, it happened in 1988 and 1989, I felt that that was just like the perfect mix. It was like the inspiration to this story. Because they're also important to bring people back to that era. This is an era of neon lights and iconic music, and people like Michael Jackson and AC/DC were coming out into the world. This changed society in a way. I mean, there's a lot of iconic things that came out of the 80s, and this story is so incredible. I mean, it's probably one of the most famous stories in the field of flying saucers, and it all relates back to the 80s. So obviously my love for the 80s, with the cool stuff that came from that era, with the fact that this story happened then, all coalesced all together to create the perfect storm. For one thing, this is my first rodeo in making a documentary film. I'm extremely humbled when I speak to friends or people who've had the experience of making a film before. I needed the help. I obviously knew about the topic. I knew about the story of Bob Lazar. I knew about everything that needs to be known about the actual data about what we're covering, but I've never made a movie. So this is something that was really a challenge for me. I'm almost 50 years old and I'm doing something completely brand new. I'm not afraid of the challenges. Obviously I took this on, but I have to say the success of this project is 100% also because of the team. I mean, Christopher, Matto, Romain Dros, Veronica, Vanessa, Emily, all the people that are on the team are absolutely important to how this went about. Plus I got to speak to friends of mine who made movies. They were giving me, suggestions, and I'm still learning. And I think it's one of the most incredible projects I've ever done. I'm very fortunate to have been doing this. I consider this to be a life lesson for me as well. I'm learning, and I hope that whatever comes out of it, everybody likes. The main inspiration was the fact that I recognized the importance of this story. And if you look at what's been going on in this field, I mean, I've been involved in it for almost 3.5 decades of my life. And the story of Bob Lazar never changed. He's somebody who's very controversial. A lot of people like him, a lot of people don't like him. But at the end of the day, if you look at everything that's been happening in the last 6 to 7 years since the 2017 New York Times article that came out regarding the US Navy pilots, we're seeing congressional hearings, we're seeing new whistleblowers coming out. They're talking about things that Bob Lazar talked about in 1989. One thing that I have to also add is the fact that his story has had enormous amount of support from science, even though science doesn't like to say that. And these were things that were happening in different years. And as that story was getting more and more support, a lot of people were changing their outlook about Bob Lazar. They were saying, maybe this guy, is not lying. And then you have these new congressional hearings coming out, new whistleblowers talking about the fact that the government has intact craft in their possession and they're reverse engineering that. Well, that's something Bob said 35 years ago. So I thought, this story is far too important. This information about the United States government and their potential defense contractors working on extraterrestrial technology and keeping it secret from the rest of the world is big. That's a big deal. And if we are to give it a little bit more value and elevate the story, what better is to recreate it with the person who saw it and so that we can the whole world can see. Because we're obviously not getting a good view from the government. Nobody's coming out saying, voila, here it is. So the only way for us to do that is to get Bob Lazar to tell us what exactly did it look like, work closely with him to build those assets, build that equipment, build the craft. And so the world can actually see it for the first time exactly like Bob Lazar saw. So I think that's absolutely paramount that was done. There's a lot of different types of equipment. So there's hardware, obviously, and hardware is the cameras that we use and lighting that we use and the stuff that we brought out in the desert, but also the actual computers that we built in-house that I would consider to be very important in terms of the tools to make this film. A lot of it is VFX. So there's incredible cinematic shots that we've done on our computers, and those computers had to have been created basically from scratch internally to accommodate the amount of data that they would be processing. So these are not run-of-the-mill machines that you would just go out and buy. These are really powerful machines that were specifically designed for creating 3D renders and 3D cinematics. So they were fundamental to the success of this project. And I think that all of that is going to show when you get it all together. I mean, even one of the things that we could do in our 3D environment is replicate the same hardware that we have physically, and we can put it in the 3D environment, which is super cool. And I cannot wait for you guys to see it. So thanks again. We're gonna be giving you a ton of information about what's to come. Definitely like and subscribe to this channel because there's definitely a lot of cool stuff on the way.